Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian. We recently covered the Naval Submarine League's 2017 conference and trade show in Northern Virginia. While there, we spoke with retired U.S. Navy Commander George Wallace, a former submariner who, with Don Keith, co-wrote the best-selling book, Firing Point. The book is being adapted into a feature film, Hunter Killer, starring Gerard Butler, that is now in production. Wallace discussed the challenge of accurately depicting highly classified submarine operations without compromising national or operational security.
Well, part of it is you have to remember, number one, it's fiction. So if I want the submarine to go 45 knots, it doesn't matter whether or not a real submarine can do 45 knots or not. It's fiction. So you have to balance that off. Part of it is, frankly, being a submariner with some experience, you've got a pretty good idea what's classified and what's not. And some things you just don't talk about. So there's some of that. And frankly, the reason I wrote fiction, vice writing my memoirs, if you will, although I'm not sure anybody would bother reading my memoirs, was so that I could explain what we did, how we did it, to some extent what we were like, and get it out to the general public without having those problems with classification. I'm a retired Navy commander. I commanded the USS Houston, SSN 713, a number of years ago. I've written 4 books, all based on submarining because that's what I know. When I retired from the Navy, my wife and I moved to Durango, Colorado. And Durango, for those of you who are not familiar with where it's located, is about as far away from the ocean as you can possibly get and still be in the United States. And I had a lady working for me, working with me, that actually thought submarines were part of the Coast Guard. Nobody knew anything about submarining or submarines. So part of the impetus was to answer that need, if you will, because I ended up telling a lot of sea stories. The other part is I was spending a lot of time traveling on aircraft, and I pretty much exhausted the supply of readable action novels during those trips and came to the opinion that I could probably do better than what I was reading and started writing. The importance for telling the stories of submariners and for veterans telling the story of submarining probably harkens back to our nickname of being the silent service. There are too many people in the general public that have no idea what we do, and we have nurtured that reputation for many, many years for very good reason, because being the silent service, nobody knowing where we are, nobody knowing what we can do, is very important for knowing the job. By the same token, the other side of that same coin is if nobody knows what you're doing and how important it is, then nobody's going to want to follow in our footsteps. And that's very, very important. Final Bearing was the first book. It was published in 2003, was a national bestseller. Firing Point is the second book. It was published in 2007, and it's currently being made into a movie called Hunter Killer, starring Gerard Butler. And then Dangerous Grounds came out in 2014, and I left out Operation Golden Dawn, which came out in 2013. The process of getting your novel into option to a movie is serendipitous. You have to be in the right place at the right time. And I happened to be in that position. We were down in San Diego and ran into Arnie Schmidt, who is, unless you're in the Hollywood industry, you won't recognize the name. If you're in the Hollywood industry, you'll recognize it immediately. He's been the producer, director of any number of movies. But we started talking. He said, "Hey, you're an author. So let me see what you've written." So I sent him, well, at first I sent him Final Bearing, my first book, and it's too big a story. Then I sent him Firing Point, and he says, "Hey, we can do something with that." And that was in 2007. Here we are in 2017. They just finished the filming and are doing the post-production, so it's a long, long process. So we could spend much longer than the 5 minutes we're doing today talking about that. I wrote the book in 2003. And for those of you who remember 2003, at that point, Russia was having some extreme financial problems. This is pre-Putin. The basic scenario is a Russian admiral is trying to restore the honor of the Rodina, the motherland. And to do this, he feels he has to overthrow the government, and he's fomenting a rebellion, a revolt. And if the revolt is going to be successful, he's got to do something to stop the Americans, to put a check in a place so that they can't interfere. And the whole plot line revolves around his scheme to do that, and then what the Americans do to, frankly, save the day. To some extent, as far as the accuracy is concerned, and as far as the true story is concerned, you have to trust the Hollywood screenwriter and the Hollywood director, because that's a different genre than I'm used to in writing, and a different audience than I'm used to in writing in the literary sense. So some of it, you still need to be truthful. And there are any number of times, places during the process where the screenwriter who is not familiar with submarining would want to do something, and it was usually a matter of saying, no, it doesn't work that way. This is the way it works. You need to do it this way because. And by and large, they accepted that and changed it. Sometimes they wouldn't, simply because they thought that was more exciting, and they're trying to sell excitement. So there was that balance that you had to work with. So it's a little different than writing the story. Probably the biggest difference, though, is when you're writing, I like to call writing the story painting. And it's painting not just what you see, but it's also what you feel, what you hear, what you think. So it's painting in multiple dimensions. When you're writing a screenplay, is different because the director has to do that. The actors have to do it. All you're doing is writing dialogue, and the scene is, and that's pretty much it. If I don't have to apologize to my friends, I will consider it a success. The only way you're going to learn to write is to start writing. So start, do it, just do it. And then probably the next thing you need to realize is that the chance you're going to be the next Tom Clancy or the next Stephen Kuntz is somewhere near zero. So don't plan on that being your life's work unless you are a very, very rare exception. And I'm not that exception. I still work in a day job. This is something very much on the side.